Okay, I have this box of patterns. Now, before you judge me too harshly, when I first started putting patterns in this box, I did not have nearly as many patterns. I started with simply patterns that I had that I would like to sew again. And those are still in here, along with some patterns that I bought, and I said, you know, if I've got new patterns, I should make the effort to sew them. So I put them in this box. And then I bought some more patterns and put them in this box. And I bought some more patterns and put them in this box. So we are at this point now where there are a lot of patterns in this box. And I have been slowly sewing through them. And so this project is going to be using another pattern from this box, which is this one, Simplicity 1538. I think it's from 2006, but it is still in print. At least last time I was on the Simplicity site, it was there. It is a fairly simple button-up shirt pattern, so I thought I would try it out. But since most of my sewing projects are at least a little bit unwise, the cloth that I'm going to use is this Tulle with a holographic foil star printed on it. I have no idea if this is a good idea or not. I'm leaning toward not. If this turns out, it could be pretty cool, or it could be a disaster. I've had this fabric sitting around for years unused, so I don't mind finally using it for an what-if kind of project, because that's how my brain works. So I have already cut this out, and I wanted to mention something. A lot of people who are new to sewing with patterns will grab a pattern, find the size on the back that corresponds to the ready-wear size, cut everything out, sew it, and say, wow, this does not fit, what is wrong? And then they quickly learn that the sizes on patterns correspond to your measurements, not to commercial pattern sizing. But there's a slightly more advanced consideration when it comes to pattern sizes, and that's the fact that every pattern has something called ease built in. Now, ease is the distance around the circumference of the garment that is bigger than the circumference of your measurements. And there's two kinds of ease. There's wear ease, which is added to the garment just so you can actually still move in it, and then there's design ease. And design ease is the most variable one because it has to do purely with how baggy or flowy or generous the finished garment is supposed to be. Now, I tend to like a more fitted shirt, so even though my pattern size for shirts should technically be 14, I tend to choose and sew size 12. 14 is for a 36-inch bust, 12 is for a 2-inch bust, and that's automatically taking out 2 inches from the overall ease. And I noticed when cutting this pattern out, it tells you that it has, let's see, 5.5 inches of ease. So it will say that your size 14, which is for a 36-inch bust, will have a total of 41.5 inches of circumference around the bust area of the pattern, and a 12-inch, size 12 would be 39.5 inches. However, it also has this dart, and I don't think a dart will look good in this sheer fabric, so what I'm going to do is fold this dart out before I cut out the fabric, and since that will be taking some width out of the bust, I'm going to go ahead and cut the size 14. I just wanted to mention though, again, a lot of people who are new to sewing, they might know about picking your garment size by your measurements, but they might not know about ease and how much that can impact the finished size. Now, a lot of patterns will have the finished sizes printed on the pattern tissue. Some, not many, will have it on the back of the pattern envelope. Down toward the bottom, it will usually say things like finished width and finished hip size. Okay, this one actually does have the finished bust size on it. So yeah, you can look at it and see down here at the bottom where it says finished garment measurements includes design and wearing ease. They have ease capitalized because that is very important, but I think a lot of people new to sewing with patterns might not be aware of ease. And since I don't like extra baggy clothes right now, things could change. I am very aware of that ease, and usually sew smaller, but since I'm going to start out by ignoring the pattern printed things and fold out that dart for the bust, I'm gonna, like I said, do some things that are unwise, but that's just how I sew in general. So I'm bringing you along for another Unwise Sewing Adventure. So this pattern calls for 1 3/4 yard of 60-inch fabric. What I have here is 1 1/2 yards of 60-inch fabric, but I think I can make it work because I like to fold only enough of the fabric at a time to cut out a single pattern piece. And in general, this saves fabric because you can mush things in closer together than when you lay it out like the pattern tells you to by folding the entire amount of fabric in half at once and cutting. So I hope that'll work. Yeah. Folding out the dart bust now and pinning it flat, and then making sure that I fold out the little extension so the side is flat. And cutting it out, as you can see, I'm still not using pins. I am using pattern weights, and I am using scissors as pattern weights. And it worked! Yay! This is how much fabric I have left, so I was pretty literally cutting it close, but I got what I needed, so that's fine. Now it's time to cut the interfacing. I never skip interfacing, especially on collars and cuffs and front button bands, because it just makes things sturdier and wear better and hang better. Normal interfacing isn't going to work for this project because it needs to be sheer, so I'm using this Tulle, which is a different way of tulle than the one used for the shirt, but it's close enough. And I am going to pre-press things. I like to press as much as possible before attaching it to other parts of the project. So these are the cuffs I'm working on here, getting the interfacing aligned, and then folding the whole thing in half. And I've already made sure that my iron temperature is enough to actually press the fold, but not melt anything, because that is the danger of working with synthetics. And so I need to find the unnotched edge, keep things aligned, and now I'm going to use my Dritz Easy Hem to press that edge in 5/8 of an inch. And as usual, this is not a paid promotion for the Dritz Easy Hem. It's something I've been using for a very long time. I'm even starting to wear the paint off of one edge. And then I'm doing the same thing, pressing in half and then pressing the edge over for the button bands. And one issue is it was warm enough not to melt the fabric, but it was warm enough to melt the adhesive holding the stars onto the fabric, so I had to stop every once in a while and carefully pick stars off of my iron. Another thing about the way I sew is the way I apply the front bands. I need to have the bottom hem pressed up before I sew things together. So that's what I'm doing now. Again, with the Easy Hem to press up 5/8 of an inch. And then I fold it to the inside and press again. The Tulle is very grabby on the cut edges, so that made things a little more annoying to work with, but I never expected this project to go easy. Now I'm sewing on the front band and folding things right side together at the bottom. And making sure everything is lined up. Now sewing the seam allowance so that the bottom is even with that pressed edge I did earlier. Trimming all the corners and the edge so that there's very little bulk. Turning it right side up with the help of a screwdriver. Let's it's a nice flat edge, but it's not too pointy. And then sewing the edge of the band down along the entire button band. Now I am sewing on the back yoke. I'm trapping the bottom back piece between the inside and outside yoke pieces. And then I am going to close the shoulders up using what's called the burrito method of attaching a back yoke. So right now I am pinning the back of the shirt front to the front of the inside yoke. And then I roll everything up and will carefully arrange the outside of the yoke around this roll and sew that right sides together to the front of the shirt and also to the back yoke that's already been pinned. So that burrito method is weird. I did not make it up, so there are plenty of resources you can look for online for how to do it that are probably going to be a lot more clear than what I'm fiddling with right now as the tulle fights me and grabs onto itself. Now everything's pinned together and I am sewing through all layers at the shoulder seams, making sure that I'm only sewing through the shoulder layers and not through the rolled up fabric inside. So that is a nice thing about tulle. I can see exactly what's going on. Now turning everything right side out through the neck opening. Really. Ta-da! And me being me, I am now top stitching the shoulder seams and also the back yoke seam because I just love top stitching and edge stitching. In fact, that's why you might notice that I use a straight stitch foot instead of a zigzag foot, even though most people use zigzag feet. It's just I like the fact that with the straight stitch foot I can align the edges of things with the inside of the foot and then get a really close stitch to the edge of whatever I'm sewing because I can just line it up with the inside of that foot and it keeps things even as long as I keep things straight myself. And from there on I assembled the shirt pretty much as instructed. Except for now I am sewing the side seams with French seams because I thought about serging, but it just didn't seem right. So I decided to go ahead and do a French seam. This step is where I try the shirt on, find the fullest point of the bust, and put a pin there. And means I will make sure to put a button at that pin, which in theory will prevent gaping. So now I have my sewing gauge, expandable sewing gauge, and I make sure to line one of the fingers up with that pin I just put in at the fullest point of the bust. And get everything stretched out. Choosing my buttons, these are simple black buttons with 2 holes in them, which will make them pretty easy to sew on. And making sure that I have enough. This shirt I think needs 9, but I forgot that the front was only supposed to have 7 buttonholes, and I went ahead and marked all 8 of the buttonholes that the sewing gauge indicated, so I ended up needing 10 buttons, but that's fine, I had them. And I almost forgot the buttons on the cuffs. So now I need to choose the cam for my buttonholer, and I do that by comparing the size of the button with the lines on the back of the cam. And the buttonhole needs to be actually a little bit larger than the button because buttons are 3-dimensional objects, so you need to leave enough room for the depth of the button to go through the buttonhole as well as the diameter. I just took out a large cam that I keep in the buttonhole and I'm not using it. I read once that you should always keep a cam in the buttonholer. I guess that keeps things from going out of alignment. And if you put the largest one in the buttonholer, then you can crank it all the way back and it will fit in the case. So now I'm being a little bit ambidextrous and putting the buttonhole on. I also dropped the feed dogs. If your sewing machine doesn't have the ability to drop the feed dogs, you can actually, there's a little plate with the buttonholers to cover them up. And I set it on a narrow zigzag and just, I keep my hands on it to gently guide it while the buttonholer does its thing. I'm starting with the buttonhole on the neckline, which is horizontal, and now I'm doing all the rest of the buttonholes vertical. And I go around 3 or 4 times. I use an X-Acto blade with a flat end to cut the buttonholes open by just pressing straight down. Sometimes I do mess up and cut through the thread of the buttonholes stitches, but generally this works for me. And I double check to make sure the button would fit, although if it didn't, it was a little late for changes, but it's nice to know that it does work. Alright, now I'm sewing in the button. I'm going to do it slow first. The feed dogs are still dropped. I have the button in my buttonhole holding foot. I have lowered the needle into one side of the button, just to make sure that I'm not hitting anything. Then I sew in place a few times, which is going to form a natural knot in the back. I set the zigzag fairly wide while the needle is down, put the presser foot back down, raise the needle up, take a pin. Because this fabric is so thin, I'm just using a regular straight pin. Heavier fabric would use a heavier needle. This is going to help form a shank, which is going to leave room under the button for the thickness of the fabric. Now I hand crank the machine a few times to make sure that it's going to miss the needle and land in the hole it needs to go into. Sew that a few times, lift the presser foot, put the needle down, take the straight pin out, put the zigzag back to straight, lower the presser foot, hand crank to make sure the needle is still going to not hit anything, and then sew in place a few times. Pull out the thread tails, leave enough so that in the end I can push the threads through and tie it. Now I'm going to do one of these in real time without breaking it down to steps. That's it. Now I need to do this about 8 more times, and we'll be all finished. It's done. However, I realized that the skirt that I want to wear with it, I still need to make. However, it's not as unwise a sewing project as a button-up Tulle shirt was, so I'm going to make the skirt on my own time and not make a video about it, so we will use the power of editing to jump to when it is completed and showing this shirt in action.